Thanks, Andrew. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be introducing a very special guest today who has a very interesting and a diverse background. Mr. Bud Darr started his shipping career in the U.S. Navy, specializing in nuclear propulsion, before graduating from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy and pivoting his career then to U.S. Coast Guard. While he was with the Coast Guard, he also found time to complete a law degree. Post that, with his time at the U.S. Coast Guard after that, Bud moved into the commercial world of shipping, leading the maritime policy efforts of the Cruise Lines International Association prior to joining the MSC Group in 2017. Bud, a very warm welcome from us.
Right, thank you.
As an ex-seafarer myself, I'm super impressed by your career transition. And I look forward to having this discussion with you around maritime policy. Thank you for taking time out and accepting the invite to speak to me today. Back to the topic. Shipping indeed finds itself today navigating a new reality. We see disruptions all across the globe. Some of them are a result of the nature-related phenomena, some geopolitical, and the others around some labor disputes. With over 155 offices across countries, more than 800 vessels on water, we're operating on 300 trade routes. I would like to ask you, Bud, how does the world feel like in this disruption from where you helm the maritime policy affairs from MSC?
Well, thank you. And first of all, let me say it's a real pleasure to be here. I've not participated in this event before, so I really enjoy seeing a somewhat different audience and hearing some different perspectives on this amazing industry that we work in. I'll also say the common thread you might hear from my background is I've done a lot of things, and maybe none of them all that well, but cumulatively, it's added up to a background that helps me a lot in the work that I do right now. And you know, these times that we're in at the moment for shipping are extraordinary. I don't think that it's ever been as complex, certainly not from a regulatory standpoint, because the pace and the depth at which we're having to deal with new regulations is almost impossible just to keep up with, much less try and help shape in a way that turns out that things get created that we can actually implement and work with. So I like to look at it as a friend of mine, Lois Zabraki, said, you know, we're an industry of problem solvers. And I agree with Lois, I mean, we are. But I take it one step further and say, if you don't like challenges or problems, you're in the wrong industry, because that's what we do. And if you look at what we do day to day, somehow we make everything work. And if you look at the unanticipated complete disruption of the Red Sea that we've seen by non-state actors right now, for example, and we couldn't really have predicted that, but it wasn't very long before, at least in the liner sector, you know, we've readapted all of our networks, including the terminals where we call at, and the names and the frequencies of the services, and made that all work. And I think in the other sectors, although it's a little more transactional, so it's a little more complicated to reroute, you know, they've figured out how to make this work for the most part as well. But I do want to take a moment, and I really mean this from my heart, that our industry does not function. It doesn't mean anything, and we might as well all go home and watch a football game on television today were it not for the seafarers, who I think are the unsung heroes of all of society, whether our brothers and sisters out there really recognize it like all of us in this room do. And here on the International Day of the Seafarer, I would feel very badly if I did not point out how deeply important they are to keeping world commerce flowing and things that we take day for day in our lives. Thank you. I have one example. I'm fortunate enough to sit on the board of trustees for Seamen's Church Institute, and I see Mark Nusselhut here, the executive director, and just one example of many where services are provided by organizations meant to do that. And I would urge you all, consider, on this day especially, providing your support in one way or another to all of those great organizations. So getting that out of the way, let me go back to what we're facing today. Because if I look at the firepower that's being deployed against merchant shipping in particularly the Middle East at the moment, but it's been other places too. It's kind of astonishing, and we still are, putting our ships and putting our crews whether we want to or not, in harm's way to various degrees. We've rerouted, but frankly, if you reroute to go around the Cape, as we have with our services, instead of going through the Red Sea and Suez, they've figured out ways to target that. And the Somali pirates, which may not be any coincidence, are active again all of a sudden. And that spreads the available forces even further. And all these new news reports you hear about a ship being fired upon, or a ship, as we had over the last couple of days, actually have an attack land successfully on the ship. At every end of one of those military type of transactions, you've got real people trying to do their job every day who are facing this without any real ability to fire back. So I think the rest of society owes it to them not only to keep the sea lanes open in general. And I joined the Navy and I was 17 when I ran away to do that. My mom had to sign the contract because I was too young. I think it was my second day in the Navy. They said, your principal job as a Navy is to keep the sea lanes open. And that doesn't matter what flag you're talking about. It doesn't matter what nationality the seafarers are. Let's keep the sea lanes open and show the resolve it takes. And I also will say, it's not just the non-state actors in the Red Sea that we're talking about, but also state actors in Hormuz. We have a ship of our own right now from our network, which is still being held captive in an Iranian port. And despite some brilliantly crafted press statements from the state actor that's done that, they are not free to go home. The ship is still there. 15 of the seafarers remain, and even if we can get them released, we have to replace them with 15 more who are immediately going to become hosted by this state actor, which thinks it's okay to just kidnap innocent merchant shipping and those that serve on it. So I think it's a special responsibility on us. Let's not forget the Galaxy Leader. I mean, that ship was taken early on in the Red Sea conflict. Those seafarers are still there. And one of the most shocking things I've ever seen in commercial shipping is, it's a tourist attraction. You can go there to have a party, you can go there on the ship to have a wedding. In the meantime, you've still got hostages there. Let's just keep that in our minds today as we think about all of these things. And the challenges are great, not just in the regulatory space, not just in people shooting at us space, but also things you can't really control. The drought in the Panama Canal, which caused further disruption. And then we do have, in the US, for example, where we did resolve the West Coast labor contract, it's now the turn for the ILA and the Gulf and the East Coast, and that is going to cause further disruption. I would say the key to managing that is flexibility and spend the money up front to have some resiliency and excess capacity available. Were it not for a substantial investment that we made to increase the capacity that we had at sea, which was criticized by some in our sector because they didn't see the need for the capacity. Apparently we did. When the Red Sea crisis happened, we would really be struggling to have enough ships to keep goods moving, especially when you can't predict the demand surge, which we're seeing now that goes along with that at the same time.
Yeah. No, thanks a lot. Very insightful, and thanks for the shout out to the seafarers. Completely stand by you when you say that. So thanks for doing that. And now, in terms of the whole bird's eye view that you've given us, and zooming into the various challenges that we have from the Straits to the Panama Canal to the labor disputes, what is the way? You mentioned that is to make enough investments. What is the best way you think to mitigate this risk largely, or the ways to mitigate this disruption risk largely? And we also see congestion at various ports. What are you doing to navigate this new unknown, essentially?
Sure. Well, I mentioned one of those means, which is wherever you lie in the supply chain, make some investments in excess capacity, because I think we'd gotten so lean in supply chains and anticipating that just-in-time delivery would just work all the time ignores the reality that we're facing today. So I think everybody throughout the whole value and supply chain needs to make those sort of investments. So whether that means you need to buy extra trucks or extra warehousing space or extra ships, if you're us, do that. The other I would think is don't pretend you know all the threats that are out there. There are, a Coast Guard Admiral that I used to work for, Thad Allen, used to describe it as, there are wicked problems, which are things that are just like really difficult to see coming, like a pandemic. Which one's going to be the next one? But pretty good chance there's going to be another pandemic. There have been many over history. That's different than a black swan that you can't even anticipate is going to happen. And I think it's important to not think you know all the unknowns. You don't. And I think having the flexibility to add in capacity where it's needed, together with building a good team of good problem solvers around you, will help you, especially in that second category, where things that are just truly unanticipated come at us. And we certainly haven't seen the last of them. We've got plenty of challenges. We're not asking for any more, at least in my company, but we're going to get them. And I guarantee it. Some of them are going to be manageable, some of them are going to be less manageable, some are going to be more predictable than others. But expecting the unknown and having systems and the right people in place to deal with those unknowns will pay off in a large way in the long term, in my opinion.
Thank you. And anything special you're doing with dealing with the port congestions?
Oh, sorry.
Well,
I didn't mean to ignore that part.
No.
Sorry. So you can't control the weather, and you can't control, what the comfort level is going to be of various pilots who have to help you navigate that weather in local environments. But what you can do is you can take more control over the terminals where you operate. In some cases, in our business, we can, and it's no accident that we now, manage 70 container terminals around the world, because when you verticalize that operation, you can have a lot more control over it and also help your networks adapt to things gone bad. Also, I think having arrangements in place where you cooperate with others, whether it's your competitors or whether it's other local stakeholders for when things go bad, helps a lot. But port congestion can have many different dynamics behind it. If it's weather related, okay, maybe sometimes you just have weather and you have to build that into your schedule. But if we look at what happened in LA Long Beach during the pandemic, had almost nothing to do with the ships. We didn't forget how to operate ships. In fact, the terminal operators were doing an amazing job. I mean, they were our biggest terminal in LA Long Beach and was operating at 120% capacity, where it's designed to be optimized at 80%. It's amazing they had enough room to keep things moving at all. But what happened is the shoreside components of the supply chain were completely inadequate to deal with the surge of cargoes that we saw coming in. So, we could have had 7,000 ships instead of the 700 that we had at the time, and they'd still all be queued up waiting to get into LA Long Beach because there was nowhere for the boxes to go once they came ashore. So I think encouraging our business partners to really think ahead as well and do their part to keep fluidity in the supply chains is really important.
Thank you. Excellent points on risk management and how to prep ourselves possibly the best way to deal with these uncertainties. Now, taking the cue from the previous session and thematically in all of shipping, I can't ignore decarbonization. It is the buzzword, so I had to bring it up. Now, even though there are disruptive headwinds in the fore, what are MSC's thoughts on the fuel policy debate, if I was to ask you?
Well, it's about time you asked that. I don't want to ignore any elephant standing in the room. That's a big one. And when I said the pace and the breadth of regulatory challenges, this is without parallel. But it's also not just a regulatory challenge, it's a practical challenge as well. If I look at IMO 2020, I was involved in drafting those regulations back when I was with the US government. And at that time, we couldn't really predict exactly what form it was going to take. In fact, I think we were of the opinion it was going to be about 95% distillates and about 5% blends that were going to be in the market. And in reality, once the fuel suppliers came through, it kind of turned it on its head. Amazing how that all came together, but that was the single biggest change in maritime regulations in the history of maritime regulation, and it was meant to happen on one day, affecting 60,000 ships worldwide. That will be a tiny little rounding error compared to the challenge we're dealing with now, not just in the regulatory space, but in actually operationalizing this. And I would sum up the single biggest challenge as being the one that we probably have the least control over as ship owners, and that is the fuel supply. This, in the end, is not a contest of who can come up with the best soundbite or who puts out the best statement or who says they're, X ready, for some molecule or another. None of that matters unless we get the fuel. It's about the fuel, the fuel, the fuel. Because we can make big gains in energy efficiency over time, and we have. We have a ways further to go where we can optimize that a bit further, but by definition, until you stop operating completely, that can never get you to a decarbonized state, and I don't recommend we stop operating completely. I think there'd be real consequences. So in the meantime, what does it really take? It takes capital, it takes courage, including investing in the unknown, and maybe spending more on your CapEx than you would like to, so that you have the ability over the life cycle of the ship, because remember, I mean, we're the third biggest cruise line in the world as well. We put a new cruise ship on the water, it may very well be in service for 40 years. I mean, think about that. I mean, what did 40 years ago look like compared to today? A lot can change, and so the best fuel choice in 2029 may be a very different choice than in 2037 and 2042. So being able to make those adaptations along the way is going to be very important. But we are not going to be judged by what we said or what we wanted to do. We're going to be judged on, did we actually decarbonize this sector? And did we do it fast enough to make our fair share of the contribution that the rest of the world, frankly, is miserably failing at? And shipping has gone from being a laggard to actually being a shining example of showing some commitment and resolve and investment capital to try and make this happen. I mean, whether we're successful or not, I think we will be. Not everyone agrees, but we now are doing far more than most other sectors and far more than some of the governments that were banging the drum the loudest. But without the fuels, it won't matter. So we really have to find ways to incentivize those fuel providers, and us as a ship owner can make a difference. But let's face it, I mean, to us it's the most important 4% of the energy consumption, but we're about 4% in the aggregate of the energy consumption in the world. We're not going to drive the energy markets. We can maybe drive a niche towards us, but we really need everything to be brought along. That takes both governments and the energy providers working together so that the energy providers at scale can make the kind of investments we're talking about. I mean, I applaud those that are making investments in startups that are maybe going to produce 300,000 metric tons of X fuel per annum, but a lot of those fuels, it takes twice as much as we're using today, so tonnage can be deceptive when you talk about it in those terms. And at the end of the day, that's a drop in the bucket compared to the 300 million metric tons of fuel we've got to replace. So that is really going to be the key. I think the enthusiasm is there, despite some pragmatism that's being brought into it, which is fair enough. These are hard problems. We talk about them somewhat differently depending on your perspective and maybe where you're from and which sector you're in, but we're all trying to solve the same problem. And anybody who tells you it's easy actually isn't involved in solving the problem. They're involved in putting out press statements. So I think that's really one of the most important keys. I think from a regulatory perspective, we must have the IMO succeed here. And that is going to take greater support from governments than we have seen in the past. It's their organization. They make the decisions. They've got to stop undermining it, because this is the most important policy and regulatory challenge the industry is going to face. If our international regulator is not empowered to take the action they need to, I don't know what they're good for. And I'm a big fan. So that is very important too. And I think that solution set involves mostly development of a global fuel standard, where we'll have a minimum greenhouse gas intensity that's acceptable for any particular fuel, together with carbon pricing and an economic element that accompanies that. I believe this industry will one way or another decarbonize with or without new regulations, but the pace at which that occurs and the options that we have available to meet that challenge are largely going to be determined by regulatory decisions made today, often by people who don't know a lot about what goes behind actually making that work. And that's a challenge. We've got to educate them, bring them along, and show them that we're credible partners and we really do want to solve the challenge.
Thank you. And would you like to throw some light in light of the fuel debate on your choice on the dual fuel LNG container ships?
Sure. So it's no secret, we have large investments in dual fuel LNG ships, but I don't want to mislead you. That doesn't mean because we certainly don't think fossil-based LNG is the answer. It's not. But you can get, depending on which type of engine you're talking about and how it's configured, you might get a 20% well-to-wake improvement. You can make a difference today. That's pretty good. I mean, that's a lot further than the rest of society has come, so why wouldn't you think about that? But in the longer term, bio and synthetic LNG have the potential to really get us to the end state that we need. And people forget that part. And for us, when we make an LNG order, I just was on a call this morning about exactly this topic. You know, it's not that, okay, we bought the methane molecules, we're good. No, it's how do we open up those supply chains for what the future is, which is the bio and synthetic version of those molecules, which will give those ships longevity and actually will help solve the problem in the long term rather than the 20% or less that maybe we can get today. Do not be misled. That does not mean that we think this is the only viable solution. But if you're taking any other solution right now at scale, you're really talking about something that's a proof of concept and a wannabe fuel that I want to have someday. Because the other molecules, the green methanol versions, bio or synthetic, or the green ammonia, or maybe to a small degree, green hydrogen, they don't exist in the market at any sort of meaningful scale right now. So we took what we could do right now, and keep in mind, we've got a very large fleet. So if we order 100 ships, it's not like we're renewing 50% of our fleet, but we need new capacity, we need better capacity, we need to accommodate the fact that we've got ships that need to be retired at the back end of the fleet. But we see room for all three of the major molecules in the fuel mix, not only for us, but for the entire future. So because we're actually operationalizing LNG, that doesn't mean we've ruled out methanol. To the contrary, not only are we considering it, we'd like everybody to consider it because we need all the help we can get in the way of molecules getting into the marketplace for us to collectively solve this problem so that we get to that end state of actual decarbonization. With ammonia, we also are very optimistic that it has a role to play. There are challenges with all of these fuels, but with ammonia, I think we've still got some major safety issues that are solvable problems, but they need to be taken more seriously than they have been so far. There is the combustion-related and then indirect mechanism that produces nitrous oxide from any ammonia that may be fugitive emissions or slip through either production, delivery, or consumption. That's got to be dealt with. And then you've got some practical problems of, hey, where do I get green ammonia from, say, Namibia, the place of production, to the place of consumption, which may be Singapore, it may be Rotterdam, maybe anywhere. That infrastructure in the midstream does not exist today. I heard Mr. Marinakis talk about him being bullish on ammonia carriers. I've heard others too. That's what we need. We're going to need a lot of that, not for all of these alternative fuels really, to move them from that point of ideal production to that point of mass consumption and connect those dots. And that's where I think the ICS and IAPH and IRENA-led clean energy marine hubs concept has a lot of potential in it. And if you find two of those hubs and you connect them together, hey, you may have a really logical green corridor to start proving the concept.
Thank you. Thank you. Very engaging, but unfortunately, we are coming to the end of the session. I'm going to be a little cheeky and extended by 60 seconds because I want to take questions if you have anyone. This is super interesting. So the best question, if you have for Bud, I'll take one question if anybody has a question. No questions.
Boy, did I go.
Excellent. Brilliant. What a session. Thank you so much, Bud. Thanks a lot for coming over and sharing.